you?
Hey, Kathy, finally, we get to meet.
Yes, I'm so grateful for your persistence. Thank you so much.
My,
I'm so grateful that you're available.
my pleasure.
Yes, I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your name as best as I can, but I said Asaf Romirowsky.
Romirowsky, yes.
Romirowsky. Okay, Asaf. Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. You
Okay,
ready?
I'm ready.
Right. Asaf, thank you so much for being with me on the Kathy Barnette Show. To all who are listening, because we're going to just jump right into just right into the deep end of this conversation. But let me first introduce to you my guest, Asaf Romirowsky. He is a Middle East historian and political commentator. You are also the executive director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Anything else I should add to that bio? I know it's very long.
That's pretty much it. You got it covered. Thank you.
I love it. Now, I wasn't going to say this, but I can't help. Now, you're the executive director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. Now, prior to Donald Trump, if someone had said, is it possible to have peace in the Middle East? I would have been like, no, it is not. Then
Right.
Donald Trump showed somewhat of a path of what one would take if they wanted to bring about peace in the Middle East with his Abraham Accord. Today, with the leadership of Biden, in office right now, it is anything but peace in the Middle East. Let's just start there. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Your point is very well taken. I mean, I think that the Abraham Accords were a tremendous achievement. And when it comes to normalization with Israel and the Arab world, it was the first time it happened in over 3 decades. And the proof has been actually when we saw Israel being attacked by the Iranians, by the drone attack that we saw back in April, is actually that you had support from the countries that Israel has normalized relations with, and even not even semi-normalized relations with. When you had the Jordanians, Israel has a peace process with Jordan and joined, and you even had support from the Saudis, who again there is talk about again moving the Israel-Saudi track along. But even for the past few years now, there has been understandings and backwork negotiations with the Israelis and Saudis when it comes to defense and security matters. And so, again, if there were to be a full normalized ties between Israel and the Saudis, I would see that as a very productive thing. That also being said, you've seen messaging-wise more support. I'd like to see obviously more, but you've seen a lot of support coming out of the countries where Israel has indeed that were part of the Abraham Accords, understanding the reality that Israel is fighting and understanding the fact that this war against Hamas, against Islamist terrorist organizations, is also a threat to these very countries and the Sunni states in particular, given the fact that everything you're seeing today is part of the Iranian axis, and Iran is the largest destabilizing force in the region at large, and they all understand what that means.
Help us understand, you just brought it up, the difference between Sunni and Shiite.
So the greatest divide in the Muslim world is the Sunni-Shiite divide, and it has to do with the fact of the fact that the Prophet Muhammad had no sons. There is a question about who is the true follower of the religion, of the movement itself. One was his father-in-law and the other one was his cousin. And that has created the greatest divide. If you look at the history of the Muslim empires, the battles that you've seen over the years have been about who really is, whether or not it's Sunnis or Shiites, who control and dominate the Muslim world and are the true leaders of the Prophet Muhammad himself. Now,
okay. And so the Shiite believe what? That it was the father-in-law?
The Shiite believe it was the cousin Ali.
The cousin, okay. And so Sunnis believe it's the father-in-law. What?
Abu Bakr.
What? I'm sorry?
Abu Bakr, the father. Yeah, the father-in-law.
Yes, the father-in-law. And so what what countries are Sunni?
So Sunni countries, for the largest majority swath of the Sunni world are Saudi Arabia, for example, which are the guardians of Mecca. Egyptians, you're talking about, the Jordanians, you're talking about the makeup in general, as far as these.
And what about UAE?
So there's a mix there.
Okay.
In the Gulf states, there can be, because Gulf has a great deal of a nucleus when it comes to business. There are Gulf Sunni states, and there are also Shia states in the area.
Like Yemen would be Shiite.
Right. The Yemenites and the Houthis, by the way, are Shiites. They're all, and so
Right.
they are all subsidiaries of the Iranians. So when you talk about Iran, which represents the greatest representation of the Shiite world, when they talk about their dominance and superiority and greatness, they refer to the Persian Empire, which would, of course, represent, and historically speaking, the time and place where Shia Islam under the Persian Empire was the dominating force. And so when you talk about Iran's entire vantage point, they see themselves as a continuation of that and an attempt to, by the way, resurrect that superiority. And so that's when,
So when you mention Persian Empire, I immediately go to the book of Isaiah in my mind, and I'm thinking about Cyrus. So
Yes.
Cyrus was the king of the Persian Empire, right?
Yes.
And it was Cyrus who God said, that's my man. He's a tool in my hand. I'm going to use him to deliver my people. And in the book of Kings, I believe the first king, it was Cyrus who delivered or who allowed the Jews to return to their homeland, which no kingdom at that time up to that point had ever done. They usually conquer people and then assimilate them into their own culture. But Cyrus did the complete opposite and allowed the Jews to return. So how is what we experience of Iran an ancestor of that kind of lineage with Cyrus?
So you are right to point out, and historians of Iran, of Persia in general, talk a lot about the fact of Jewish treatment under the Persian Empire and under Cyrus, and the fact that, again, you also can go back to the Jewish book of the story of Purim, when you talk about Mordechai and Esther and Queen, and as far as there are monuments in that area where the Jews were able to get support and were seen and had the kind of support they needed to defeat what is seen in Jewish tradition are the Amalekites. And what, if you look further all the way back, people trace it all the way to Nazi Germany and as far as other ideologies today, as far as the Amalekites that the biblical Jews were forced to fight. Now, that being said, the configuration of the radicalization of Iran today, really you have to go back to the Iranian Revolution back in 1979. That is, in a modern day times, really the quintessential radicalization of Iran itself under the Ayatollahs. The fact that you had, the rise of really, our American war on terror stems a lot from 1979, and all these tentacles that you see today are a byproduct of the Iranian Revolution. And we've seen that. So when you talk about American history, going back to the attacks and the hostages in Iran, going back to the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, I mean, these are all part of Iranian footprints. And so that narrative comes to fruition. And by the way, it's important for your listeners to understand that when Iran talks about its nuclear capability, there is a theory within Shia Islam that talks about that in order to codify their superiority and the fact that they are the true descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, an Armageddon type event needs to happen.
Yeah.
That cataclysmic event, they interpret that through the use of nuclear power. And so there is a theological connection into their quest for nuclear superiority, as far as also solidifying militarily, theologically, and historically Iranian superiority, as far as solidifying Shia Islam in the world, and the fact that they should be leading the way.
I think a common misunderstanding with most people is that when you're looking at Shiite Muslim, is that they want chaos. According to, from my understanding, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but from my very limited reading of the Quran and some of the Hadith literature, that their Mahdi is the equivalent, looks a lot like, from a Christian perspective, the return of Jesus Christ. They kind of look like, like this is their savior who's coming. And so, but he comes out of extreme chaos. And from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, from a Shiite's worldview or vantage point, it is incumbent upon them to create the environment from which their Mahdi will come. He's going to come out of extreme chaos, come back and save them and all of that. And it's incumbent upon them to create as much chaos as possible. And so from my understanding, specifically with Shiite, they're not looking for peace, although they may use that vocabulary, but they're not looking for peace as we would define it generally. And from their perspective, their mandate is to create as much chaos as possible, because that is where their savior is going to come out of.
Yes, you're mostly drawing the broad strokes correctly. I mean, the return of the Mahdi will come out of this kind of chaotic, cataclysmic event and solidify their superiority. It's also important to note, vis-a-vis the phraseology and the understanding. Islam, does not mean peace. Islam actually means submission. And so, the idea of, that understanding of the submission to the higher power, and through the strength of overpowering all the other Muslim states, this will solidify the fact that they are the true followers of the Prophet Muhammad himself. And if you are, just to take it one step further, just to understand the narrative, Shiites and Sunnis, they believe in similar ideas and the 5 pillars of Islam and whatnot. The interpretation of Shiism is much more orthodoxy. And so the orthodoxy within the Shia narrative is much more binding. So case in point, so when Shiism, for example, issued a fatwa against Salman Rushdie after 1970, after the revolution, when he wrote his famous book, The Satanic Verses, that is binding. And so literally it was and has been a target on his back, given the fact that he was seen as an entire enemy to the Muslim faith, and the fact that he desecrated the name of the Prophet himself. That was how he was interpreted. Whereas Sunni, interpreters or, theologians would say it's a recommendation. Now, it's also important to note, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing, when it comes to the Islamist narrative, the radical element of Islamism within Sunnis and Shiites, really there you can really literally see no difference. Because if you're looking at the current war today, you have Hamas, which is Sunni, Hezbollah, which is Shia, Houthis are Shiites, and they're all working together under a greater evil. And the greater evil in their narrative is what is seen in their viewpoint as the 2 satanic evils, one being Israel, the second being the United States, and at the West at large. The threat of Western lifestyle, and which is seen as promiscuous to Muslim, understanding and orthodoxy, that represents a larger threat and allows both radical Shiites and radical Sunnis to come together and work, which is where the Iranians have been able to capitalize on both Islamist organizations to come together to, of course, fight this war.
So I'm going to ask you to pause so you can double click on this. So are you saying that with the degradation of the morality in America, not to say that Sunnis would, or Shiites or Sunni would have agreed with our sense of morality even back in the 1920s, but today, given the lack of morality, the significant decline in our moral compass here in America, are you saying that is uniting many Sunnis and Shiites in this war against America, one of the great evils?
Yes, historically, that is correct. I would also argue, add to your point, that they've been testing the waters. I would argue, militarily speaking, lack of deterrence in the region. Every time we've gotten attacked by the Iranians, and there has not been a decisive military response.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to that part in a minute. I just want to make sure that I was understanding what you're saying. Are you saying this, like, for example, right now, I can't think of any greater evil and our sense of our lack of morality as abortion, obviously, but even more so now is this move of transgenderism among our children, where little girls are having their breasts removed, or little boys are being chemically castrated,
Yes.
or grown men gyrating in front of little babies. Just a very degenerate behavior that we're seeing that's gripping our nation. Are you saying that is something that is causing Sunni and Shiites to come together in their war against one of the great evils, America?
Those are symptom of a larger problem. That kind of behavior, this DEI and the wokeness, and the kind of the use of switching genders around, those are things that is not permitted in the Muslim world. And so those are seen as sign of weakness, in the eyes of these individuals. But the entire lifestyle of Western society, which is seen by the Islamist narrative as promiscuous, our fashion, pornography, music, the cultural promiscuity in their viewpoint is seen as something that is not traditional, that is desecrating, and is not the way as far as modesty goes. I mean, when you talk about the kind of cultural narrative that exists, it's a very conservative cultures that you're talking about when you talk about Arab Muslim countries in particular, versus the kind of cultural promiscuity that they would foresee in American and Israeli society, because they also see Israel as a mirror of American democratization. Those are the kind of images, even without going into, to your point, about a deeper dive about the cultural symptoms that you're seeing today about, gender issues and DEI and wokeness and whatnot. Even on a more superficial level, they see our societies as not following what traditionalism, in the eyes of religiosity, the way they follow it, would be seen as a promiscuous move. And so
allow me to just, say, I mean, I'm sure these particular people and the way they see the world would not have agreed with American sense of fashion or morality back in the 1700s.
correct.
In fact, we know that because I've read some of the letters that President George Washington received, and some of the other our founding fathers received from various Arab nations. So they didn't agree with our sense of morality and fashion and all of that before. But I think what's interesting is that, again, I'm just harping on transgenderism because I just find it to be, the fact that relatively intelligent people have intentionally decided we will confuse ourselves and our children, we will comply with what is obviously wrong, that that is interpreted as weakness. Like if there was ever a time to attack America,
Yeah.
it would be now,
Yeah.
in the sense that, the degradation of, open borders, or, DEI and all of that foolishness. And then you have, again, grown men being allowed to put on breast prosthetics and gyrate in front of little children. Like that is interpreted as weakness in the minds of the Shiite and Sunni nations.
Right. I mean, the degradation also goes with the fact that, what gender you are is very clear to them, is a divine, what you're born, the kind of individual you're born as. And that is also the divine, intervention of who you are. And messing around with that is also sacrilegious from their perspective. And so, again, these are all symptoms of this larger problem. Yeah, historically speaking, you mentioned, letters to Washington. Thomas Jefferson used to have a Quran by his bedside to understand the enemy that he was fighting. And when we talk about American intervention in the Middle East, for example, we were fighting at the time, the Barbary Wars. And again, understanding, the theology and where it comes from, also part of the long history of American intervention in the Middle East. Again, Western intervention in the East is something that they hold a grudge against, over, historically speaking. And that's another part of the where the animosity towards Israel and the West comes from, as far as larger powers getting involved in Middle Eastern politics.
Where does the Abraham Accord stand today? Is it fledgling? Is it holding on by a string?
It's holding on. I mean, I think that the war itself, the war in Gaza, is definitely is testing the waters, and I think that we need more support. We need to bolster their supports. There are those in the current administration who believe that the quid pro quo is Gaza to Saudi Arabia. I do not subscribe to that equation. I think that the Saudis understand the value added that Israel brings, especially within Israel and the Sunni states in the area itself, and especially going back to my earlier point about fighting the larger threat of Iran. That being said, as Arabs, they are voicing sympathy towards our brethren and as far as victims of the war itself. But I think that a lot of these questions are going to play out, and we're already seeing it play out as far as, excuse me, the role of the Arab world post the war, especially the Egyptians, for example, which is where the border is with Gaza. The Egyptians have been complacent with Hamas, and Israel has a peace process with Egypt since 1979, and so.
But not just complacent with Hamas. They've done nothing to protect, quote unquote, innocent Palestinians. They have not accepted,
No.
the last time I looked, even one Palestinian. And so they are complicit in the deaths of Palestinians. I know the media is saying it's all Israel's fault, but Jordan nor Egypt has accepted even one of these Palestinians as refugees to come and seek shelter.
100%. And the tunnels, by the way, are all going into Egypt. So where the rearming, the retraining, potentially where hostages are located, the leadership of Hamas is all under Egyptian territory. And let's not forget that Egypt is a recipient of USAID. Where is the pressure that should be coming in from the White House on an ally of the United States to fight terrorism? And so from the Egyptian perspective, let's also put it historically, into context. The founding of the Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt in 1928. They understand directly what the threat of Hamas is, because Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood. So from their perspective, let's contain and keep all the threat under Israel's responsibility. We don't want to deal with that. So that's exactly what they've been.
So they're playing both sides of the fence. They are a partner with America. They're part of the Abraham Accord. And yet they haven't even done the basics, which is accept, according to many, these peaceful Palestinians who just want to be left alone, but they're left there and they're being killed. So
Yeah,
they're not even doing the basics.
no basics. But let's also to be just to clarify, the peace process with Egypt predates the Abraham Accords. The
Of
first,
course, of course, of
the
course.
first country that Israel has had peace with was in 1979, and so Egypt, has had an ebb and flow of Cold War and peace relations with the Israelis.
Of course.
But here you have an exact example of that, and exactly where have they been? And again, I would argue the same thing, as far as the patrons, the people who've been funding Hamas, the Qataris, who have basically funded all this activity, but they're still involved in the hostage negotiations. They try to play it both ways by trying to play good cop bad cop, but where is the responsibility?
And that's why this is so murky, right? It's not just black and white. It's not cut and dry of what Israel has been contending with since October 7th, and what it's going to take to secure to secure their own people. I believe Israel has every right to secure their own people. They didn't start this fight, but I believe it is incumbent upon them to finish it. And I believe it's very disingenuous, the conversations we're seeing out of America in some regards, as well as with around the world about what Israel's responsibility is in all of this.
100%. Israel has a right to self-defense. And if any other country experienced what Israel experienced on 10/7, where they are fighting urban warfare and they are going house to house, hand to hand combat,
murdering, raping, mutilating, putting babies in ovens. I mean, this is just the stuff of animals. Like, I don't even think animals would do anything that we just saw.
These barbaric,
many
horrific
of these
attacks.
people did.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just go back, because we have a lot of sensitive people out here in the world of over the internet. And so you said that I did a good job with the broad brush. I want you to correct me where I was wrong when I said one of the fundamental differences that I see with Shiite Muslims, for example, is that they don't want peace as many in the West would define that word. That in fact, it is mandated upon them to create as much chaos as possible, even nuclear chaos, because out of great chaos, their Mahdi, their equivalent of a savior, will come out of that. He doesn't come out of peace. He comes out of a time of great chaos. And it is incumbent upon them, a good Shiite Muslim, to create and manufacture as much chaos as possible. Am I right? Am I wrong? Where
No,
can you add some additional color?
That is correct. That is exactly the Ayatollah's interpretation of the quest for nuclear superiority.
And so when Americans come with their hat in their hand, sitting down with these people saying, let's have another peace agreement, I think it's incumbent upon us that if I'm going to go into a negotiation with someone, I need to understand what the ground rules are. Like, what are the expectations of the people on the other side of the aisle? Like, what is peace to them? And is this real peace, or just a pause so you can re-gun yourselves, re-equip yourselves to come back and do what you did on October 7th all over again?
Yes, I mean 100%. I mean that's how they. I mean, look, all the negotiations back in 2015, we were playing checkers. They were playing three-dimensional chess. I mean, they came and equipped, and the manipulation. I mean, the way they viewed all of this. And let's make no qualms about, and there's really no ifs or buts about it. The fact of the matter is that the money that we gave them in 2015 and the release of the sanctioned money now is going directly to Hezbollah.
Absolutely.
Hezbollah is a direct arm of the Iranians, and so the next front that's already happening now, Israel fighting the war in the north, Hezbollah is a direct arm of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
But now add to that in the south with Yemen and the Houthis and what they're doing to the Suez Canal, bombing ships. Add to that also Saudi Arabia deciding not to re-enter into the petrodollar agreement. Give us some color of what all of this means.
The,
Or or are there no connecting dots at all?
They are connecting dots. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that from the Saudi perspective, they've been fighting, the rebels in Yemen. They've been fighting the Houthis. They represent the Saudi war on terror from their perspective. They want to keep them as far away from any intervention. But, the goal has been is to interrupt the economics of all of this. I mean, we know how valuable the Suez Canal is. There has been historically wars in the area itself as a result of trying to impede the flow of goods going back and forth. There is an economic component to all of this. And if they destroy that, and let's also not forget, import-export is also import-export east and west. And so when you're talking about trying to target these legitimate targets, that's cutting off the flow and that's impacting our economy. When you talk about the prices of oil and the prices of gas, I mean, this all
the prices of tissue paper, the prices of, like we are a global market.
Yes.
We produce very little, we import a whole lot, and these things travel through these particular waters that the Houthis have now laid claim over, and there's a big battle that's brewing because they are firing on these transport ships and setting them on fire, and it's very unnerving for anyone to try to a commercial ship of some sort to try to move through that area to bring goods and services to the rest of the world.
Of course it is. I mean, and by the way, these are exactly these targets are chosen because of their symbolism and the chaos. It's the same reason why the towers were selected in 9/11. What they represent, the economics, American Western values. I mean, these targets are not chosen at random.
Yeah, and it creates chaos. Now, what about what can you share with us on what it means that Saudi Arabia would refuse to sign another contract using petrodollars?
Look, I think MBS is a very careful observer. He's watching what's going on. The perception has been, and this goes back, by the way, to the Obama years, that America is shifting its attitude and support between Sunni states and Shia states. Historically speaking, American foreign policy, we have supported ties with the Sunni Arab states. The history with Saudi Arabia is a long history that the U.S. has had with the Saudis. And after 2015, after the JCPOA was signed, the perception in the region was that the U.S. is changing its policy. And so here now,
do they believe Biden is going to win again?
No, they're not sure. They're again, but that's part of the hesitation. They're following all of this, and they are concerned. Of course, they realize that Obama also has connections with the current Biden administration, and so the concerns on the region are great. And so they know it's an election year. They're following all of this. And of course, they're following very closely what's happening on the ground when it comes to the war. How the United States reacts, and how the United States react also especially to the ongoing triggering, literally and figuratively, by the Iranians, which again, if Saudi Arabia is the guardian of Mecca, Shia Islam represents a direct threat to Mecca, which is the holiest city of Islam. And so you have to understand what that also means theologically speaking. If the U.S. is not taking clear, decisive deterrence moves militarily speaking, that also signals to the Saudis that they have to take care of their own, which they always do. And so when it comes to looking at the larger constellation of the region itself and American attitudes, they are not quick to do anything. The perception in the region is today, just to be frank, is that if you want to get a lecture, you go to us, the Americans. If you want to get an airport, you go to the Chinese. And so let's put it.
If you want to get luxury, go to America.
If you want to get a lecture from somebody lecturing you on how to do business, you'll get that from the United States. If you want to get an airport, you'll go to the Chinese. And so you also have to put it all into perspective as far as other superpowers getting involved, especially China, getting involved with the Chinese and the Russians, especially getting involved with the Saudis. And
Well, Russia
so
has been a very big player in your region, in that region of Israel, the Middle East. But now America has a Russian nuclear submarine 40 miles off the coast of Florida. And our government and media keep telling us there's nothing to see here. Go back to sleep. I know we're in a war with Russia, and now we're using some of our weapons to actually attack Russia. But there's nothing to see. It's just a drill. Go back to sleep. I know that you're here to talk about the Middle East, but Russia is a very big player in the Middle East. This has, huge ramifications, even though it's over here in this hemisphere. What are your thoughts?
agreed. I mean, the Russians are looking to establish a kind of Cold War 2.0. The Russians have been going around being consistent. The message coming out of Moscow has been, the evil you know versus the evil you don't know. Let's be clear about, look at the Americans. They're meddling with the region itself. Russia has bases in Syria. They've been involved with the Turks. They've been involved with the Chinese. And so, from the perspective of consistency, for example, how the Biden administration absconded, any way you want to kind of look at it, from Afghanistan, and the mess we left there. And even the way we left.
It's just weakness. Right. Everywhere you look. Weakness, open borders, weakness.
Yes.
Our interactions with China, weakness with Taiwan, weakness with Ukraine and Russia, weakness, these men going into women's space, just weakness all the way around. And I'm like, I know I'm a lay person. I am not a subject matter expert in these things, although I'm beginning to feel like a subject matter expert in a variety of issues. This seems very basic to me, that we have a very real problem on our hand. I don't even know if we're going to have an election. I mean, we're very weak right now. Why would China, Iran, Russia, you name it, not attack us before an election and before we get better leadership?
100%. I mean, look, they're doing it from the whole psychological warfare. I mean, look at the whole use of TikTok as far as winning the hearts and minds of Westerners, and how they.
Do you think that is too extreme, what I just said? Like, these people do not have our best interests. We're in a war. We try to destroy Russia. I don't know why we would think Russia is our best bud right about now. And so if these regimes that are not very friendly towards us, China, Russia, Iran, if they were looking at a clock on when is the best time to strike, why not before the presidential election, before we stumble our way into electing Donald Trump? Why wouldn't they, between now and then, do something?
They have no reason why not to. I agree. I mean, I think that they are constantly watching, and they've been constantly meddling with our with our elections. I mean, this is not a new policy. I mean, I think that they see an opportunity. And to your point before, we are giving the impression that we are weak. We are lacking deterrence on the international stage. Our behavior and the way we're acting in the region itself, the fact that we have not been decisive when it comes to Iran, which has the footprints of all of this, and blood, American, Israeli blood on their hands throughout all of this. And we are still releasing sanctioned dollars for the Iranians. We're still allowing to build money for the largest air force outside of the United States in Qatar. I mean, the fact that there's no consequences for these violations is proving the fact that we're going into this mode where the Biden administration has taken on American foreign policy into isolationism, and that's coming into bite us time and time again.
Yes, I agree. I don't know. Like, what is the solution? Let's see if we can end this on a high note. I don't know. I mean, I would love so much to be the person who pick up pom poms and go rah rah. And I mean, that's I'm built genetically to see the glass half full. I love being happy. But I am unnerved when I look at the world. I have a big world map right here on my wall, and I mean, there's a fire everywhere, one way or the other, whether culturally or literally, like open borders and things such as that. Are there some rays of hope?
I would like to hope so. I mean, I try to remain optimistic myself. It's a very difficult situation as you're looking at the environment culturally in America. A whole other topic, which we didn't get to this morning, is, of course, what's been happening with the encampments on American college campuses.
Ridiculous.
All a symptom of this larger problem. There's an attempt to turn America on its head by these totalitarian regimes, Islamist, radical groups, progressive groups, socialist groups who are trying to take American democracy and turn it on its head. It's really, to my mind, very much 1984-ish, if not more. And I think that it's time to reestablish once again clear boundaries, clear modes of deterrence. I mean, I think that people are waking up in cities where you're seeing the violence, the rise of anti-Semitism, and the attacks that are happening. My hope is that we don't need to have this kind of wake-up call, but unfortunately, we're at that point. And I think that it's yet to be seen what happens in November. But I think that we have to clearly understand that what's at stake here is the future of American society, and this cultural shift that has afforded a normalization of anti-Semitism and racism is hurting us. And we need to win that war. This is a war that needs to be won and reestablish clear understandings of what America is and what America should be.
I agree. I'm going to leave it right there. Asaf, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Absolutely. Blessings. Stay right there, Asaf. To everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in to the Kathy Barnette Show. I appreciate you guys. We are growing like fungus. I'm planting right now. That's the analogy that came to my mind. Yes, on YouTube, because of you guys, because you're clicking, you're sharing. I mean, the amount of interactions that I'm getting over on the YouTube platform has been such a blessing and an encouragement to keep bringing great voices to have these conversations. So continue to do your part, share, like, comment, do whatever you need to do to make sure that those algorithms are seeing what it is that they want. Thank you so much. Blessings, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.